There's three or four things that I look at now. How much starch do you have? Any estimate of ruminal starch digestibility? Not that I don't get highly focused on that unless I think there's a problem.
Mhm.
But then I'm looking at how much fat are we feeding? Are they feeding, and what form is that fat in? And I'll come back to that. And then I'm thinking about sugar sources, and then I come back to amino acids. So in that, that's all predicated by where's your rumen nitrogen balance, where's your MP balance, where's your split between RDP and RUP.
Welcome back to the Dairy Podcast Show. My name is Barry Bradford from Michigan State University. Today, I'm very honored to be welcoming Dr. Mike Van Amburgh to the show. Dr. Van Amburgh, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Barry. Thank you.
Mike is a longtime professor at Cornell University. To give you a little bit of his background, he's working in a dual position in teaching and research there. He has been on the faculty since 1995 at Cornell. Very well known for his work in supporting the CNCPS model, which underlies the most popular dairy formulation software in use in the U.S. and in a lot of countries around the world. He has a pretty heavy teaching load and probably most known for the Cornell Dairy Fellows Program, which he's been guiding for a number of years and probably gives some of the most in-depth dairy management and consulting training that you can get in a bachelor's program anywhere. So again, Mike, I know you've got a busy schedule. Thanks for joining today.
No, very good, Barry. It's all good. Glad to be here. This is kind of fun. And I'm looking forward to this because this one seems we don't have any slides. We can just talk, and I think that's great.
Exactly. So I know you, at least I think you came off of just in the last few weeks, the Dairy Challenge competition, national competition this last year. I think probably most people listening have heard of that, but I'm just curious if you talked to somebody who had never heard of it, how would you describe that program?
Yeah, I think Dairy Challenge is a great program, one that I've supported a long time. I think it's what I call intensive dairy consulting on steroids, right?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Right. We're trying to take a bunch of kids and get them to see a dairy for what it is in its working clothes with, all the opportunities that may be present, and then how to integrate those opportunities with their financial decision making. Right. And, I think the thing about the Dairy Challenge is that it's kind of in the moment, right? You will think about things you might want to do 2 years from now, but most of the time it's how do you find the milk? How do you find the efficiency? How do you fix the real opportunities, maybe some of the things that are broken? And how do you present that in 20 minutes in a comprehensive way that everybody can understand?
Adiseo, a global leader in nutritional solutions and the provider of Smart Amine M, the best in-class rumen-protected methionine product for dairy producers who want to optimize milk production, capture more value from their components, and maintain the lifetime performance of their herds. For more product information and to calculate your return on investment when you balance your feed with amino acids, go to milkpay.com.
Excellent capstone opportunity. And I think one of the neatest things to me, and to be fair, I haven't been super involved with it, but short of an MBA, I don't know of many opportunities where you really get hammered on how do you try to actually get people to make that decision, right? It's one thing to present information, but how do you position this in a way that's going to activate change in a business or on a dairy in this case? I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, especially in young people who, are going to be a little reluctant to know how to make those decisions and what to prioritize,
Yep.
right? I think learning how to prioritize that stuff is really hard when you have no real track record in that area. So getting that experience and that exposure before you graduate is really profound, I think.
Well, thank you for your efforts in that space. It's hugely impactful, I think. So we mostly want to talk today, though, about nutrition, kind of more from the research side. And I know you've been doing a lot of speaking lately about how to drive component yields. And maybe one of the first things we should talk about is, if you're going to sit down with a dairy producer and get a sense of where they're at production wise, what do you think is the best metric, for evaluating productivity of cows on a farm?
The two things, and I don't think this is not new or novel or unique, right? I think this is where most of the good dairies are at and the good consultants. It's feed efficiency, and
Okay.
it's pounds of fat and protein or energy corrected milk per day, right? How many pounds of components are you putting out per day, and with the highest feed efficiency
Yep. Absolutely.
while getting your cows pregnant.
Yeah. Right. There's always the other wrinkles around it. Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right?
that's exactly right.
So what have you been playing with in terms of driving? I know, you go around the country and you talk to people now, and people are blown away by the concentrations of fat people are getting in Holstein herds today. And, obviously genetics has driven some of that. But what are you helping farms think through in terms of nutritional programs to support that greater component productivity?
The thing that makes well, I want to start with the easiest thing and the most useful thing, but the hardest one to approach every day. You're looking for the most digestible NDF you can find in an
Mm.
inventory that allows you to make best use of it.
Yeah.
That if you want something to, I laugh about nutritionists, right? I play with, in developing the CNCPS. One of my jokes is I want to take the art out of your nutrition and turn it into something that's quantitative, right? Which means we just have to have more information. And a lot of times where there's a lot of art there, and the art really gets interesting when you have low digestibility NDF diets, right?
Hmm.
Because all of a sudden now you have to be really creative. But again, to me, that's quantitative, right?
Yep.
That was one of the reasons I wanted to get to that whole thing of UNDF is say, okay, how big is our pool size? How much can we actually digest? How much can we get in there? So the first place I start is let's look at your forages and say what our opportunities are. Because I think one of the things that I've recognized, and I just had a lot of conversations with this the last couple of days at Tri-State, when you look around the country, New York even, I see diets. I always refer back to Merton's numbers, right? 1.2 to 1.3% of body weight intake of NDF. And when you look at some of these intakes at 62 to 65 pounds or better, and you say to them, "Do you agree with Merton's numbers?" And they say, "Yeah, yeah, I use that." I said, "Are you sure?" Right? "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." Right? Then why isn't your diet 34% NDF? Because that's what Merton's numbers would say you should be feeding right now. Oh, we could never do that. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's two things there, right? And where I'm going with that is that you ask what I look at first. I'm always going to look at the forage base. I'm going to look at forage inventories. I'm going to think about, if they do have some good, higher digestibility corn silages or forages, how much of that can we get in there? Because I think sometimes we're losing some efficiencies in those rumens because we're probably underfeeding NDF a little bit. We get focused on particle size. And as long as we see decent chewing and rumination, we think we're doing okay.
Yep.
But when I think about rumen fill, this is probably where Mike Allen's hot theory really comes into play, actually.
Yep.
Right? We don't feed enough NDF. And I was always taught, Van Sues taught me that, if you underfeed NDF, they're just going to eat to fill eventually. I don't think that's happening. I think we've got so much starch in the diet that we can underfeed NDF, but they never really will compensate on the physical fill side because they're sensing enough energy from the
Yep.
starch that they just aren't going to consume anymore. And we've learned that by adding some corn silage to diets, and the cows just eat it, and we don't take anything out. And it's like, well, how did they do that?
Yeah.
It's because the rumen's not full. So anyhow, high digestibility high digestibility NDF is where I would start that conversation just to understand where they're at, because that then dictates, how can you, what are you going to supplement? How are you going to change the diet to maybe get more components out of that cow? And, if you're thinking about, more butter fat, a little more NDF to digest would be a good thing.
Yep. Absolutely.
The next step is, once we get past that, the three, there's three or four things that I look at now. How much starch do you have? Any estimate of ruminal starch digestibility. Not that I don't get highly focused on that unless I think there's a problem.
Hmm.
But then I'm looking at how much fat are we feeding? Are they feeding, and what form is that fat in? and I'll come back to that. And then I'm thinking about sugar sources, and then I come back to amino acids. So in that, that's all predicated by where's your rumen nitrogen balance, where's your MP balance, where's your split between RDP and RUP, right? Because I
Right.
see a bunch of dairies that are probably feeding a little bit too much RDP.
Just because they're loading up on alfalfa, is it?
Well, either alfalfa or they've thrown some urea in there,
Okay.
right? As kind of a safety factor. It could be a combination of things, or they're just throwing a high protein feed in there because it's cost effective,
Right. Yep.
and it might not be, if they're peeing it out the back end, then it's probably not being used efficiently, and you're spending a lot of money for manure, right?
Yep.
So we might do some adjustments there. So I'm looking at the starch, and one of the things we've learned internally here, we've got a, like everything I'm teaching, so I can't get all the papers out, but
I
you
feel
know,
you.
yeah. One of the big steps, push up the NDF a little bit. I'd like to see NDF in that 30 to 32 range,
Mhm.
right? Which does scare a lot of nutritionists today. They'll say, I can't do that. And I'm always interested in why they say I can't do that, whether it's inventory or digestibility. I'm not quite sure because, when we run all of our studies, 30's low for us, and we've been up as high as 33, and we get really good performance. And we don't have the highest digestibility forages, but the cows will eat it, and we get better. It looks like we get better efficiency when we're
Mm.
doing that. All right. So when we're thinking about that, we're probably pulling the starch back a little bit. I would prefer running somewhere in that 25, 26 range, which I think is a little counterintuitive to where a lot of people are at. But again, this is just getting to those, how do we get more components out of the cow?
Mhm.
All right. And again, it's a little more feed efficiency. When you're doing that, you do bump feed efficiency a little bit. So we'll pull back on the starch. I'd like to see sugar. I learned a long time ago. I used to sit around and listen to, up at Shadow Lawn at Minor Institute when Sniffin was up there. Right, I'd get to go up there. Van Soos would say, "Hey, I want to go see Charlie this weekend or this next week." Right, so I'd be his chauffeur up to Minor, and I'd sit there on the porch. This is when I was a grad student. I'd sit there on the porch, and you'd have Charlie, Pete, Will Hoover, Bill Chalupa, and
Wow.
whoever else was there, right? All sitting around on the porch drinking whatever they're drinking and talking about stuff, right? And Hoover would always, we got to get more sugar in those diets, right? And he'd talk about the protozoa, and he'd talk about what a cow should be eating, and so I've held on to that. And again, that's not new and novel, but we don't tend to think about it the same way. So what we found is that when we can push the sugar up, somewhere between 5 and 7, by pulling the starch back, all of a sudden
Yep.
we're getting better butyrate production. We're working on some soluble fibers, so we'll get some beet pulp or citrus pulp in there if we can. And again, I'm thinking about substrates for milk fat production, but I'm also thinking about, substrates to promote some protein synthesis. All right, and that's protein synthesis in general, not just for milk protein, because I think we forget that fat synthesis is really a protein synthetic activity, right?
Yep. It is.
And once you do that, so a little bit more sugar, get some more butyrate, pull the starch back. Now we can think about amino acids, right? Well, or you can go to fatty acids. I think lately I had a big discussion with Adam Locke the last couple of days about this, right? And Adam and I see it a little bit differently, but in the end, we kind of agree on most things. The cow probably has a fatty acid requirement, right?
Okay.
And we've always thought about fat as an energy source, but we've never really thought about fat as a substrate to do things like triglyceride synthesis in the gland. And the first thing we learned when we put high levels of palm in the diet is all of a sudden we saw more milk fat. And that simply told us that energetically it was more efficient to take that 16O, pop
Yep.
it on the triglyceride somewhere. Adam would say always in the first position, but it doesn't have to be, and that we will get more milk fat out, right? And that saved her some reducing equivalents, some ATP, whatever it happened to be, to allow her to use that energy to go do something else, right? Because in the end, I think this is all about energetic efficiency. So you get this, we get the fatty acids, right? The oleic, the high oleic beans are quite the hit now.
Yeah.
and we've got a herd here in northern New York where they were already doing well on components. They layered the beans on there and they went up 2 to 3 more units, right? They're running,
Wow.
3,700 cows running almost 4.8 fat and 3.5 true protein on Holsteins. Yeah, it's crazy, right? That they didn't get there right away, but once they layered the beans on there, it was really quite astounding. So I think a blend of fat, don't overfeed it. 4.5% fat is probably fatty acids. Ether extract. Adam laughs at me because I still use ether extract, but we don't have everything worked back to a fatty acid basis yet. One of these days we'll get there. And then now where do we put our lysine, methionine, and histidine? And those are the three. I know the NASM came up with five. I think I think those are the three that we can manipulate the easiest right now.
Yep.
Methionine's easy. We've been doing that for years. We're using our approach. We're in a version 6.5 approach. That's 1.19 grams of methionine per mcal of Me. All right. So if they're consuming about 70 mcals, that puts you in that 82 to 85 grams of metabolizable methionine, and it'll put you in 224 to 225 grams of lysine. And then keep the histidine equal. In our book, we say keep the histidine equal to the methionine.
Okay.
Alex Ristoff this week at Tri-State, on Monday said you want to feed the histidine a little bit above the methionine, right? So that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it the way he described it. So we might have to try that a little bit
Yep.
and see if the cows tell us something different. So that's kind of in terms of component yield. If we can do all of those things and know that we've delivered the right amount of amino acids, right, back to bioavailabilities and things like that,
Hmm.
generally we see some response, right? I, don't- I wish to God I could say, yes, in fact, all this is going to happen all at the same time. What I learned is that it seems like cows are going to use those nutrients to whatever energetic efficiency best works. I've kind of given up on the concept of nitrogen efficiency, because when we do that, we always see something, right? We either see milk protein, sometimes we see milk fat, sometimes we see milk volume, sometimes we see all three, right? And in either case, if you back calculate feed efficiency or energetic efficiency, that's almost always higher than any nitrogen efficiency shift.
Okay. Yeah.
So in my book, what we should really be thinking about is this is all to enhance energetic efficiency, because if we can get more energy corrected milk out of that cow per unit of feed intake, then that's really what we're striving for. That's, to me, that's the goal. It doesn't always help your case when milk protein pricing is such that you're not incentivized to make a lot more milk protein. But I think that's the funny thing about this is you can't always guarantee that that's exactly what you're going to get, but you will get something, right?
So the whole basis for that strategy, which makes perfect sense to me, um, you start with digestible forages, right? And as you pointed out, sometimes that's a problem. Sometimes you have a bad growing environment for a year, so it's hard to put up a good crop. But we have a lot of farms where if you want to feed more, and I guess this would be my answer. I don't know if all the consultants will say this, but when they say I can't feed 32% NDF, it's land based, probably in many cases, right?
Yep,
The herd has
absolutely.
grown to the point where you can't produce as much, say, BMR corn silage as you'd like to feed. So, how do you help a farm think through a scenario like that?
Comes back to pricing, comes back to the marketplace, right? And
Yeah, it
pricing.
does. Yeah.
So, let's go find some non-forage fiber sources.
Okay. Yep.
Right? Wheat mids, a couple pounds of wheat mids are going to go a little ways to doing that. A little bit of soy hulls can do that. A couple pounds of beet pulp or citrus pulp can do that. And then whatever else might be in your neighborhood that's cost effective. So it's not that hard to add that back. Do you get the same efficiency out of those that you would out of a forage NDF? The answer is no, because they're smaller
Right.
particle size and they're going to pass faster. But you can get it up there, and every time we do that, it seems like we enhance ruminal efficiency, and then that's how I would work through that.
Yep. Fair enough.
And I learned that years ago. There was 2013, when there was a drought in the Midwest, and I was getting phone calls from nutritionists who said, "Hey, I'm going to have to go to like 20 or 30% forage diets. What am I going to do?"
Yeah.
Right. Well, we went, and luckily there was a plant in Dayton, Ohio, that was making a corn byproduct, and it was very high in NDF and very high in digestibility. And you throw 10, 12, 14 pounds of that in there, and the cows, a lot of them went up in milk actually,
Yep.
because it was more uniformly digestible than the forage. Yeah, so that was a big life lesson.
A lot of those diets in the high plains today. Yep.
Yeah.
Talk me through. I mean, histidine is maybe a newer focus, as you kind of alluded to. You're putting a diet together. You look at the specs, and it's coming back a little low in histidine. How do you approach that today?
Blood meal is your friend.
Yep.
Yeah, until the swine industry decides that they really want to use histidine, so we get it out of a pharmaceutical grade, type ingredient. Blood meal's our best friend there.
And
And there aren't too many alternatives that I'm aware of either. That's the sad part of that.
how do you approach the question of variability in bioavailability or digestibility of blood meal sources? Is there an easy way to kind of screen that?
Yes and no. It's we we worked for 5 years to develop an assay to estimate that. The assay works pretty well. It's still got a few fits and starts in the commercial setting, just mostly because of sample handling.
Okay.
And we're working to refine that. We've tried publishing it. It didn't, some people want to see some more information. So we're back to running it again, and trying to clean up a few things that I think will make it acceptable. And I think some of that's just this the translation to the field, right? And what we do internally may not be what a commercial lab can do, but we can estimate that. But I think, that's one of the more diabolical things about blood meal, is there is so much variability around it.
Mm-hmm.
Even internally, we've done studies where we tested it, we implemented the diets, the cows aren't behaving the right way. We tested again once we started the diet, and we realized that from the time we tested it until the time we got it, that something had changed. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a real problem. And so that is one of the negatives to that ingredient. So, and I think part of the problem with that, the opportunity there is we move through it so fast that by the time you get an analysis back,
Yeah.
you've probably moved through it, and you're always behind on that. So, one of these days, maybe I hope we get to an NIR prediction, so we could do it pretty rapidly. That's going to take a little more intensive work. A couple of the commercial labs and I have had conversations about that. So I think that's on the to-do list here in the next couple years. See if we can get a faster screening for that.
Good. Yeah, that'd be really useful. Okay, one more piece to this. Total productivity. Uh, I mean, we always tell farms it's all about doing 5,000 little things right. But let's say you go on a farm, they've got a perfect diet, they're not getting the productivity out of the cows. Is there one or two most common sort of management things that you see as being the most common bottlenecks?
I don't know if they're common. I think it depends on what region you're in.
Sure.
Yeah, overcrowding. I know in certain parts of the country, and I'll see this here in the Northeast a little bit. We'll be, you know, I'm happy at 120%, and maybe you can get up to 130 and not break too many cows. And some guys do really well higher than that, but they'll suffer some component yield, right? They'll still be able to make decent amount of milk, but they'll suffer some component yield. So I think backing off on that, and that's all, again, that's a financial decision.
Yep.
But the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, when a bunch of dairies were told, you can't ship, we're not picking up X amount of milk on Monday. I'll talk about one particular dairy. They called me up and said, "Can you help me sort through my cows? I gotta do something, right? Because I can't ship all this milk." So we sorted out 200 cows, and they sold 200 cows, and they made more milk than they did the day when they had the 200 cows, right? So they called me up again and they said, "Can you help us sort out what are we going to do now?" I said, "Get rid of some more cows." They got rid of 200 more cows and they're still making the same amount of milk. That is, to me, that's a life lesson in we got to be careful what we wish for and what we think we're doing, because the financial repercussion of that, you were feeding 400 cows that you really didn't have to
For
for
no
the amount of
benefit.
for no real benefit, right? Holy crap, right? Your balance sheet will look really good because you're going to have all that forage
And
hanging out, right?
hauling out manure for those 400 cows. We got to think of the biggest pressure point, right? What do they not want to do the most? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's and that's one example. That's not everybody, right? I don't want to
Yeah.
paint a broad
Yeah.
brush on that one, but that's one good example where, hey, if our objective is milk per unit of feed efficiency, that's a good example of where there was a real opportunity, right? I think there's more of those out there, and that would be where I'd look. Time budgets, water space, all the old basic stuff. Because of fellows, right? We go out and we
Hmm.
still do case studies, and we're going to measure all that stuff. And it's always surprising to me, where we find relatively new barns that are 20 to 40% short on water space,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
right? And it's not that they did it on purpose, and it's not that somebody screwed up. It's where they place the water, right, and the availability of that in the design of the barn. Academically, there's enough water space, but in actuality, you're not going to get it the way everything's designed. So there's always those opportunities there, the real basic things.
It's time for our famous three. Typical fresh cow incidence of clinical hypocalcemia is 3 to 6%, while subclinical hypocalcemia affects 50% or more mature cows. Based on cutting-edge research, Exelite offers a new approach that is build effective and the ZDUs. For more information, visit www.protecta.com.
All right. Well, we've got our three famous questions we've got to throw at you, and looking forward to your answers here. So, our first one, we always ask people, what's your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
That's a hard question for me because if you could see my office, the down below my head here, you would realize that books and papers are my friends.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any one book. I this is going to sound really academic and corny, but whenever I'm thinking critically about something and I'm really trying to try to understand something that maybe I don't know, especially if it pertains to the rumen, I'll go back and read Pete's book.
Hmm.
Right, I'll pull out a chapter, and reread parts of it just to see what he said and how it pertains to the way we see it today.
And the title of that, if somebody wants to go try to find it,
Yeah, I don't know. Nutritional ecology of the ruminant.
there you go.
There we go. Yeah, I should know that, right? But
When you know the author, it's easy to remember as his book, right? Yeah.
right, right. It's just like his feed chemistry book that I helped edit. Right. I don't really remember what we called it.
Okay.
It's right over there on my desk, but I know what it is.
I know at least one other person listed that as one of their favorite ones. Okay, good.
Yeah.
What about your favorite book or resource outside of ag?
I read when I have to. I don't really read outside a lot. That sounds kind of funny. Um, you know, I read the Economist magazine a lot.
Uh-huh.
All right. I read Nature. I read a bunch of. I just read this really broad portfolio of things. I don't know if I have any favorites or any one thing that I go to. I'm always trying to understand what's going on in several areas.
That's
Right.
good.
I pay attention. I pay attention to some things in Europe. I pay attention to some things in China. I'm just trying to understand what the tenor of a bunch of things are out there, either whether it's politics, whether it's culture or agriculture, right?
My favorite page of The Economist is the obituary page.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. That's the one I read first, right?
Yep.
Exactly. It sounds really morbid.
But it helps you, yeah, it helps you think long term. Like, what am I doing that's worth writing up in your final obituary? Right?
Yeah, no, I think I do that. I do that when I take, it's funny you say that because I lead international trips and we always, the one that's kind of become just, the one we always do with the freshmen and sophomores is we go to Italy. And we look at all the cheeses, we look at wine and prosciutto and stuff like that. But we'll spend a few days. We'll spend at least a day and a half in Rome.
Hmm.
And you get him in the Pantheon, or you get him in front of that stuff, and you're standing there with him, and you're trying to explain to him, when it was built, why it was built, all this kind of stuff. You take him to the Vatican. I always tell him, I don't take you to the Vatican for religious reasons. I take you to the Vatican for the art and the structure, and then make them understand when that thing was started and how they built it, right? And when it was built. And then we walk out, and at some point, usually over dinner, I'll look at them and say, so what are you going to do that's going to be remembered, 1800 years later or 2000 years later? Right. And it's not so much a challenge to them as this just stimulates some thought about
Yeah.
what do we do and what do we accomplish?
That's a great lead into the last question then. So in your opinion, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are less successful?
Those that want to learn.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so much fun when you get into a room of people who truly want to learn.
Yep.
And that to me is really rewarding, for both sides, right? Because if they want to learn, I'm going to learn too, because they're going to see something or hear something or understand something that I don't, or in their way, and that's informative to me because that helps me figure out how to teach it better or different.
Excellent. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Again, Dr. Mike Van Amburgh from Cornell University. Any parting thoughts?
Not really, Barry. This has been really enjoyable. I think, the dairy industry is a great thing. I think we still have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of opportunity out there. We still have a lot to learn, so that keeps me motivated, and that should probably keep us all motivated.
Fantastic. Thanks for all your contributions.
Okay.
This has been another episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. If you haven't subscribed or liked it yet, make sure you hit that button, and we will see you next time.